What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another installment of the Tilian Philosophy series. And in this one, I wanted to take a look at a passage from Van Til's An Introduction to Systematic Theology and try to break it down because it is a somewhat popular passage, and I feel that we need to dissect it and see what we can learn from Van Til's words here. He says, and I quote, "In all non-Christian forms of epistemology, there is first the idea that to be understood, a fact must be understood exhaustively. It must be reducible to a part of a system of timeless logic. But man himself and the facts of his experience are subject to change. How is he ever to find within himself an a priori resting point? He himself is on the move. Every effort of man to find one spot that he can exhaustively understand, either in the world of fact about him or in the world of experience within, is doomed to failure. If we do not, with Calvin, presuppose the self-contained God back of the self-conscious act of the knowing mind of man, we are doomed to be lost in an endless and bottomless flux." End quote. Now, I'm sure a lot of you, if you are interested in Van Tilian apologetics and philosophy and things of that nature, may have come across this passage. However, I don't think many really appreciate how much it displays Van Til's genius and the way he thought about these things. Let's break it down piece by piece. He says, in all non-Christian forms of epistemology, there is first the idea that to be understood, a fact must be understood exhaustively. It must be reducible to a part of a system of timeless logic. In the first sentence, Van Til points out that non-Christian epistemologies set before themselves the ideal of exhaustive knowledge. On the face of it, this sounds ridiculous, right? Many people and many non-Christians would agree that we do not need to have exhaustive knowledge to have some knowledge, right? One can say that I know that the object in front of me is a computer without needing to know exhaustively every fact about this object or the facts about objects that are related to it. I think the next sentence explains Van Til's reasoning here. He says, it must be reducible to a part of a system of timeless logic. What does a system of timeless logic mean? Well, simply put, it means a system of universals, or we could call them concepts. Van Til is making the point that to know any particular thing, we must be able to place it within a system of universals or concepts. We must be able to place it in relation with other things. For example, to know a particular apple, we must be able to predicate things about it. We must be able to ascribe certain properties or qualities to it. We can identify its sweetness or its redness or its roundness and things like that. These are all qualities it shares with other objects. That is, they are universals. Properties, qualities, characteristics. These things are abstract in nature. They're more conceptual, and they denote relations between facts. A red apple and a red car have redness in common. However, one wants to cast that out philosophically, we cannot deny that there is some form of similarity or commonality that we are predicating on each object whenever we apply the general term red to them. This can be said for any object that can be known, whether it's a car, a flower, galaxies, another person, an animal, a rock, a pen, whatever it is. Knowledge of any particular thing, any particular fact, any particular object requires us to be able to ascribe certain qualities to it. And these qualities and properties, as we've mentioned, show relationships, resemblance, or similarities to other facts. And if this is the case, that implies that knowing one particular thing requires you to have a very robust and comprehensive system of relations between facts, objects, etc. Because every single object, if we are to be able to know it, has to be related to some other object or some other fact. It just goes to show that a comprehensive system of concepts or universals, whatever you want to call it, what Van Til refers to as a system of timeless logic, that must be present in order to know any particular thing. Universals facilitate relations between facts. So to know any fact, we must be able to incorporate that fact into our system of universals. And this system is timeless. Like Van Til mentioned, it's a system of timeless logic. It's timeless in the sense that it does not depend on temporal relations. A red car that existed in 2005 is still related to a red car that will exist in 2040, for example. The time difference, the temporal separation between the facts is irrelevant to their relation because concepts, universals, generalities, things of that nature are abstract and conceptual. They do not depend on temporal relations. They are timeless in that sense. So Van Til says that to know any fact is to reduce it to a system of timeless logic, i.e. universals, because any fact that cannot be incorporated to such a system must be unknowable. If we cannot say anything about the qualities, the properties, or the characteristics of an object, then that object is nothing. It's a complete mystery. We cannot say anything about it. If there was an object that we could not say anything about it, it would be a complete mystery. So the next part of that passage is really insightful. Van Til says, but man himself and the facts of his experience are subject to change. How is he ever to find within himself an a priori resting point? He himself is on the move. Now, this is brilliant because Van Til's observation here captures the futility of non-Christian epistemologies. As Van Til rightly observes, both the subject of knowledge, which is us, and the objects of knowledge, which refers to the facts of our experience, like the pens, the chairs, things like that, these things are subject to temporality and change, unlike the system of timeless logic that we explained earlier. And this temporality and change makes it impossible to find an a priori resting point. Now, what does Van Til mean by this? It is the system of universals we mentioned earlier. The system of universals, or the system of concepts that we mentioned, if it is to be useful to knowledge of particular facts, must be a priori. Because, as we said, to know a fact, we must be able to incorporate it into a system of universals. What this implies is that the system of universals, the system of concepts, must be available prior to our experience of the facts. It is an a priori system. A priori simply means apart from experience or independent of experience. The system of universals must be independent of our experience of the particulars if it is to serve as a way of knowing the particulars. How exactly, and this is the point that Van Til is trying to make, how exactly are we supposed to obtain a timeless system of concepts or universals prior to experience? Like he said, we are temporal and changing. The facts are also temporal and changing. How are we to arrive at a timeless, changeless system of universals that can interpret every fact we could possibly come across in the contingent realm of experience? It is impossible. The facts would exist in total isolation from our system of universals. We have no control over history, which is the events that occur in time. And so we cannot force the facts to conform to the system that we just happen to find in our minds. There seems to be no way to find an a priori system that can interpret our experience. The facts that we come across in the world, the facts that we experience, the computers, the chairs, the leaves, these things are subject to time and change. Things are constantly changing. Things are constantly evolving. And all this occurs within time. This constant change is what defines our temporal experience as human beings, right? This is really different from what our system of logic or of universals, of concepts, is supposed to be. Like we mentioned, the system of universals is timeless. It doesn't matter what time it is, what time period we exist in. The concept of redness, for example, remains the same. And it purports to relate facts which may exist in vastly different time periods. And so that presents a bit of a problem, because if we try to construct a system by experiencing individual facts, such a system can never be universal, because everything is temporal and changing. We can never know what effects unexperienced facts would have on the system we have constructed. The system of universals is only useful if it can interpret our experience. And in order to properly interpret our experience and grant us knowledge of the facts, it must be universal. For example, think about if we came across an object that none of our universals or none of our concepts could apply to. Like we mentioned, such an object would be unknowable. It would be a complete mystery to us. In order to avoid this skepticism and mystery, the system of universals must be able to interpret every single possible fact that we could come across, at least in some way, to some degree. And that requires universality. But how can we acquire universality? How do we come across a universal system that can make sense of every single possible fact? Experience cannot grant us that, because our experience is finite. We cannot know every possible fact that is out there. Because experience cannot grant us universality, an a priori system would not have any bearing on temporal experience, because, like we said, we do not have complete control over what happens in history. We cannot rule out the instantiation or the actualization of facts which resist incorporation into our timeless system. Once again, think about an object that cannot be interpreted by this system of concepts. The existence of a fact that cannot be interpreted, that a fact that none of our concept applies to, the existence of such a fact would render that system of logic, that system of universals, useless. Even if we have the system before experience, because we do not have control over what facts may arise in the world, we cannot rule out the possibility of such an unknowable fact arising. And once again, we cannot guarantee the universality of this system. And this is what led Van Til to say that every effort of man to find one spot that he can exhaustively understand, either in the world of fact about him or in the world of experience within, is doomed to failure. If we do not, with Calvin, presuppose the self-contained God back of the self-conscious act of the knowing mind of man, we are doomed to be lost in an endless and bottomless flux. You see, the argument is simple. Knowledge of facts presupposes a timeless, comprehensive system, a system of universals, a system of concepts, a system of logic, whatever you want to call it. But such a system cannot be gained from a finite temporal world. Neither an a priori or an a posteriori method can grant us a universal system of logic. Therefore, all non-Christian approaches to epistemology, which fail to presuppose the revelatory activity of God, end up in skepticism. We can point out that the Christian doesn't have this problem, because for the Christian, this system of timeless logic exists eternally in the mind of God. And God, through his eternal counsel and through his providential control of the facts of the world, creates the world in accordance with this system, which is his plan. So we can say that history is simply the unfolding of the eternal plan of God. And so in such a view, the system of timeless logic and the facts of the world are actually tailored to each other. And God reveals this system of timeless logic to man in a way that he can understand, in a creaturely way, in a finite way. Knowledge, on the Christian view, is simply thinking God's thoughts after him. We are using the system that existed in the mind of God even prior to creation. And anytime we come across a fact, we are simply re-knowing it in a sense, because God has known it first and foremost. And based on his revelation, we simply apply the universal system to it. And that's how we know a fact. So the Christian doesn't have any problem. The unbeliever, on the other hand, has a multitude of epistemological problems due to the fact that he cannot find an a priori system that can interpret the entirety of his experience. As such, he is doomed to global skepticism and subjectivism. Anyways, that is what I have for you today. I think that passages like this really showcase the brilliance of Van Til's thinking and his scathing critiques of unbelief in epistemology. And if you want more of that, you can grab a copy of my book, The Folly of Unbelief, where I go into more depth of the Van Tilian critique of unbelief in epistemology. It's on Amazon. You can grab a copy. The link will be in the description. And I'll see you next time.